A concept of a Boston Bruins roster took to the ice on Sunday against the New York Rangers. We've got all the storylines, stats, and signals that you need to know from the 3-2 exhibition loss.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked Bee. Today is Monday, September 23rd, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. Boston Bruins hockey is back, in a way. An exhibition game was played at least on Sunday against the New York Rangers, a 3-2 loss with a concept of a roster being deployed. Now, there's a couple things we need to touch on first before we get into the performances, stats, signals. First, I have a new way of breaking down games this season, the 3 S's, the key storylines, the big stats you need to know, as well as signals or trends for the future. And one of the storylines heading into the preseason game last night, of course, is that it is just NHL preseason. And while there's no real value in terms of points earned and stats put up, it's significant for a few reasons. One, of course, being player evaluation. Preseason games give coaches and GMs a chance to assess players fighting for roster spots, including prospects, newly acquired players, and those on the bubble. Preseason performance can determine whether a player makes the team or gets assigned to the minors. And that's something to keep in mind, especially in regards to last night's roster. We've heard head coach Jim Montgomery say several times that he likes to keep his more veteran players or guys with the best chance of making the opening night roster fresh for the later stages of the preseason. And therefore, guys who play in the first couple games are big long shots to make the roster, or guys who really need to prove themselves moving forward. So it was interesting, therefore, to see both Fabian Lysell and Georgii Merkulov in the lineup last night against the New York Rangers. These two are highly touted players from Providence with a lot of promise, and yet their spots on the NHL roster are far from guaranteed. And we'll get into later on in the podcast what exactly they were able to do last night to show, or not, that they belong on the roster. So again, it's interesting that guys like Matt Poitras was being left out of the lineup last night. Maybe that's still as he works his way into game shape. Conditioning game shape is another really important part of the preseason schedule. It's a long off season. Preseason helps players get back into game shape, essential for shaking off rust, rebuilding stamina, getting used to the speed and physicality of NHL play. Poitras had that major shoulder surgery, which is important to keep in mind here as he ramps up. Lysell, of course, is coming off a head injury as well. So even if he didn't perform super amazing last night, we can maybe give him a bit of a break as he is experiencing his first game action since going through that. Now, line chemistry, strategy testing, teams do experiment with different line combos, defensive pairings, strategies to see what works best. It's a low-risk environment to fine-tune systems before the regular season begins. And, of course, injury load management play into it as well. For veteran players, preseason can be used to ease back into play without the full intensity of regular season games. Teams can limit ice time for star players to avoid injury while still giving them a tune-up. And again, we saw last night with the roster that was deployed by the Bruins, maybe one or two guys that you can expect to be in the opening night roster. John Beecher, I would expect, will be on the fourth line playing center or perhaps wing. Mark Kostelic as well. We'll discuss him later on. Mason Lohrei on the back end, as well as Andrew Peeke. That's your third pairing likely for opening night. Bussi, perhaps as a goaltender on opening night, depending on the Jeremy Swayman contract as well. So maybe a handful of players there. Most of these guys are destined for the AHL, perhaps including Lysell and Merkulov, who didn't exactly impress last night. So that's the key storyline to keep in mind here from the preseason. It's just preseason. We can't overreact or draw too many conclusions from these games because they don't really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things. There's a lot of playing around with line combinations. There's a lot of getting guys up to speed on how the Boston Bruins play. Yes, there are similarities organizationally between the AHL club and the NHL club, but it's still a big step. And even if you're not playing against top opposition, the New York Rangers did not deploy their top roster by any stretch last night. It's still a step up in terms of competition as guys are ideally fighting for jobs at the NHL level. You also have to take into consideration the line combinations, as if Fabian Lysell, for example, is going to make this team, he'd likely be playing against or with Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand, not Riley Tufte and Cole Koepke or something like that. So while he has all the offensive talent in the world, or a good measure of it, you can only work off what you're given as well, and that plays a role in things. So that's kind of all things to keep in mind in terms of the preseason. The other thing, of course, is preseason games are often held in non-traditional markets or smaller arenas. Last night's game was played at TD Garden, but the Bruins will play in Quebec City, for example. So it's a chance to see NHL teams in a more accessible setting. Also helps teams grow their fan base by expanding their presence. Bottom line, it was exciting to have NHL hockey back last night, such as it was. And while I do think the preseason still is a bit too long, it's nice to have black and gold back on the ice, back on our TVs, listening to Judd Surratt, who did a great job, I thought. And there's another game coming up tomorrow night, so we'll have no shortage of preseason action leading up to the season opener on October 8th. So how did some of these guys perform? What were some of the key stats that were put up? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money, even if one of your picks doesn't hit. PrizePicks also puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as fast as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. If you're hiring, there's no better place to look than Indeed. We're all driven by the search for better, and when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. It's to match, and you can do that with Indeed. If you need to hire, you quite simply need Indeed. It's your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. So ditch the busy work, use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, and connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Boston Bruins. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Please do smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube if you have not already, and never miss a thing. So we talked a bit about the key storylines from the preseason opener. Keep things in perspective, what the value of the preseason is. But let's look now at some key stats from last night's game. And a couple of the players that I mentioned to keep an eye on, of course, Fabian Lysell, Georgii Merkulov. Lysell did not really impress. He had 14 minutes and 56 seconds of ice time with 2 minutes and 20 seconds on the power play. He did not record a shot on goal. He had one missed shot. He did have a block and a hit and 2 giveaways, 0 points on the night. He did have a nice effort near the end of the game to prevent an empty netter, but not very impactful on the offensive side of things, which is where, of course, he is meant to shine. So when you're looking at Fabian Lysell coming in, trying to impress head coach Jim Montgomery to give him a spot on the second line, yes, he's not playing with Coyle and Marchand. He's not necessarily set up for success with the line mates that he had, but a first round pick, 21 years old, should be making the jump to the NHL at this stage in his career, playing in a preseason game against lesser competition. You would expect a bit more jump and this guy to come out firing on all cylinders. Again, he is recovering from that head injury, perhaps a bit hesitant in that respect because he doesn't want to get banged up again. He doesn't want to get knocked around and risk another concussion. But at the same time, there needs to be a bit more there, at least shot-wise. To only have one missed shot on net, that's not really going to cut it, especially when you're getting 2 minutes and 20 seconds on the power play. Merkulov, he did have a point in this one. He got a secondary assist on Cole Koepke's goal, which was scored at 1:34 of the first period. Got the puck to Billy Sweezy, who fired the puck on net, and Koepke got the rebound and popped it in. The other goal was scored by Trevor Kuntar, assisted by Patrick Brown and Jackson Nelson. Good for them to get on the board. But again, those guys are destined for the AHL, to be sure. Koepke did lead the way with 4 shots on goal, 16 minutes and 50 seconds of ice time. Koepke is a 26-year-old who has only 26 appearances at the NHL level, both over the course of the past 2 seasons with the Tampa Bay Lightning. 1 goal, 2 assists. Again, a very, very depth forward, unlikely to see much action, if at all, with the Boston Bruins this season. On the blue line, of course, Lori, Peak, I identified as 2 of the guys who are likely or should make up the third pairing. Parker Wotherspoon was in there, but was limited to only 13 minutes after leaving for an injury check. He's penciled in as my number 7 defenseman, but of course, if he is injured or banged up, then that could throw a wrench in those plans. Looking at the goaltenders, Brandon Bussi got the start. He allowed 2 goals on 12 shots for an .833 save percentage. Michael DiPietro came in, saw 10 shots and made 9 saves for a 900 save percentage. Not really blowing us away with those stats, but it's a smaller sample size, of course, when you're splitting starts. Again, I don't think you should underrate DiPietro's the possibility of DiPietro impressing here in training camp and pushing for one of those spots if Jeremy Swayman is not signed. He was highly touted goaltender out of the OHL. He was a third-round pick by the Vancouver Canucks back in 2017. He has played a couple games at the NHL level very sporadically since 2018, mostly in the AHL, but still has some potential there and the drive to be an NHL goaltender. That's one of the reasons why he wanted out of Vancouver, was to get a shot at the NHL level. He was part, of course, of the Jack Studnicka trade, has not played up with the Boston Bruins as of yet. But it's not guaranteed that Brandon Bussi is ahead of him on the depth chart necessarily. If DiPietro can impress, then he should still be on the radar. Of course, there are questions about whether Bussi, Korpisalo, and Swayman could be on the main roster if the latter is signed prior to the start of the regular season. Both Bussi and Korpisalo require waivers to be sent down to the to the AHL. Bussi much more likely to get scooped as a 26-year-old rookie, 6'5", 220 pounds, a big body in net, and he's made some pretty impressive saves down in Providence and with the Bruins last year in the preseason. Again, 2 goals on 12 shots, not spectacular, but we can give these guys a bit of a pass because it was the first preseason game, perhaps some jitters there, perhaps some rust to be shaken off. Playing in drills or even that scrimmage, black and gold scrimmage the other day, not really enough to bring these guys up to game speed, even NHL preseason game speed. So those are some of the key stats to keep in mind from last night's game. The Bruins losing 3-2 at the hands of the New York Rangers. Not the best performance for this team, but again, they did outshoot New York 28-22. That's not something that happened very regularly last year. The Bruins had the advantage in faceoffs, which is encouraging, 52.9. They had 11 blocks. They had 16 giveaways, however, and hits were 28-28. In terms of the faceoffs, that was an issue for the Bruins last year. Beecher went 6 for 6. John Farinacci went 10 for 15, which was pretty impressive. Vinny Lettieri, 2 for 3 for a 66.7 success rate. Jackson Nelson, 3 for 6. The top guys were Farinacci and Lettieri. Not likely to see many faceoffs at the NHL level. The guy we were looking at, of course, is Beecher. 6 for 12 for a 50% success rate. About where you'd want him to be, perhaps a bit higher than that, though, of course. All right, that's it for the key stats. What about some signals that we saw there last night? What can we take away from this game moving forward? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and NFL fans can start the season with big returns on FanDuel, which is, again, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. To get started, you'll get a $200 boost in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So just go to FanDuel.com, put $5 down on the Boston Bruins over-under, which I believe is set at 97.5, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets, and you can use that all over FanDuel.com. NHL, NFL, NBA's coming up just around the corner as well. Visit FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. So what can we take away from this game? What are some signals that we can look at moving forward? I think you can pencil in the Peak Lorei pairing as the third pair, keeping an eye on Parker Wotherspoon, his health moving forward. You can perhaps glean that the goaltending competition is kind of open. Bussi has the upper hand still. Korpisalo, I'm excited to see him in net. Perhaps we'll see him as early as tomorrow night's game. But that is something to keep an eye on, of course, with the Jeremy Swayman contract stalemate still looming over this team. And Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts just this morning, offering just a quick 20-second update saying there's still philosophical differences on 8-year offers and counters on both sides, and no appetite at this point to go to a lower term. Lysell and Merkulov have a lot of work to do yet in order to impress head coach Jim Montgomery. I don't think they, especially Lysell, who I expected to have the better shot of making the lineup, didn't really do much to impress. And while dressed many regulars last night, all eyes were on these guys, nobody really saw much. They were the only two Bruins without a shot on goal in the game. And that's with some power play time. Merkulov did have the secondary assist, but they also just weren't around the puck offensively as much as some of their teammates. Lysell struggled when he did have the puck on his stick. He turned it over twice on one shift that eventually ended up with the Rangers scoring their third goal. Another rough turnover trying to enter the zone on the power play, nearly leading to a shorthanded chance against. He did have, of course, that nice back check late to prevent an empty net goal. That's the kind of effort we want to see at all ends of the ice. That's, when we talk about replacing Jake DeBrusk in the top six, that's the kind of effort you need. And that's the area of DeBrusk's game that grew and that I think we're going to miss a lot here. Again, Merkulov did pick up the secondary assist, so at least he found the score sheet. But a lot of quiet shifts after that. He went 3 for 8 in the faceoffs, which isn't great. So you give the edge to Beecher in that respect, a guy who had a role as a rookie last year and is expected to pick that up. These guys haven't really been standouts in practice either, by all accounts. And if right now you're picking for the opening night roster, I don't think any of those guys, either of those guys, have the juice right now to get it done. Goaltending, again, not looking great. Of course, it's just the preseason. The goal DiPietro allowed was not great. Got beat 5-hole on a low angle shot from Alex Belio. That's a goal you can't give up if you're hoping to push Bussi and Korpisalo for a roster spot. I still do think he has upside, and a guy who could push for some playing time this season, especially if Swayman isn't signed. One guy that did impress me was Mark Kastelic. He showed Sunday why he could become a fan favorite, landing some big hits, dropping the gloves. Love the physicality, love the forecheck. And on the downside, there were some offensive zone penalties that Jim Montgomery did not like. Kastelic was pretty ramped up. Needs to kind of tone it back a bit, but likely going to get the start on the fourth line here as a physical presence. And he also did have some penalty killing time as well, including on a 5-on-3. So he's a safe bet to make the opening night roster. Wotherspoon had that injury scare, but he came back and avenged the hit by seeking out the offender, Brendan Othman, and dropping the gloves. Good to see him come back, stand up for himself, penciled in as the 7th defenseman, challenged by Jordan Orstley, Ian Mitchell, Billy Sweezy, but Witherspoon should have the edge because of how he asserted himself late last season. Poitras, I would say Matt Poitras, again, did not play last season. That's a good sign for him, or last night, I should say. That's a good sign for him because it perhaps signals that he has a edge over the AHL guys that are looking to take his spot on the main roster. And perhaps it means he's avoiding an assignment down in Providence. He has looked very good in training camp so far. And I'm excited to see him back in action for the Bruins, hopefully as early as their next preseason game, which is scheduled for tomorrow night, Tuesday evening, and they will be hosting the Washington Capitals, I believe, in a 7 p.m. Eastern start. Later on this week, the Bruins will be taking on the Rangers on the road and then the Flyers on the road as well. So a 4-game week here for the Bruins every other night. And we're going to continue this triple S breakdown, storylines, stats, and signals. Let me know what you think about this new format. If you have any feedback, please do send it over to Locked NHL Bruins or at Ian C. McLaren. You can also drop a comment on the YouTube version of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here on this episode of Locked On Boston Bruins. For your second listen, go find Locked On NHL, where local experts keep you updated daily on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.